Hi, and welcome to Project Rat. In this video I'm going to show a quick and easy way to create simple textures. I'm using this method to create textures for Galactic drone. You can download this model by clicking the link in the description. You can also skip the video to where I'm importing the model and the texture to Unreal Engine by clicking the timestamp in the description. So I've imported that drone by going in File and Import FBX and navigating to where the drone is. So if we go into Edit mode, this drone is already unwrapped. I've already unwrapped it and I've got all my elements laid out like this. Basically you can just move them around by selecting the islands by hovering over them and pressing L and then G to move around. So I've got all my elements laid out like this. They're already actually ready for texturing because I've done that earlier. Because UV unwrapping sometimes can take a lot of time, so I'm not going to cover this in this video. But then you can go to Photoshop, and what I'm doing for this current game is just make a new file and call it texture. 1024 by 1024. The graphics are kind of like a bit of cartoony, simple graphics, low poly models and everything. So it's all got this cartoony feel to this. So I'm just going to fill the background with grey by pressing Shift and F5. That's filling with the color that you've chosen. And I'm thinking about colors for the drone already. And I want them to be bright and saturated and still also cartoony and stuff. So I've chosen both colors and I'm just going to make a new layer and basically make a grid of colors that I want to use in my drone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this square a bit of like a teal color. The next color I want to use, I'm going to make another layer for the next color and make a swatch for this color, and it's going to be kind of orange. So I can fill that in with this color. I can always press Ctrl U for to change it quickly to something that I want. Just make it this for now. Now I want light gray and I want dark gray as well. So I'm just going to make another layer for dark gray. Just going to color pick this color and make it a bit darker. So now we've done our color grid. Basically these are all the colors that I want to use in my drone. So now we can save it in the textures and let's just make it PNG. Let's just leave it at texture. So if we go back to Blender, we need to add a new material to the drone. So let's call it drone, and in here we need to press Shift A and add input texture coordinates and add texture node, image texture, and connect UV coordinates to the vector and color to the color of the diffuse shader. So right now we haven't got any texture in, and I'm in material viewport mode or viewport shading mode. So we haven't got any texture loaded, so it's black at the moment. So we want to open our texture, which we saved here, texture PNG, and there we go. Only I've already unwrapped it, so all the elements in the UV map are where they should be, so it's already done, which is not good for this video because obviously we want to see how it's done. Let's see what we can do. Let's go back to our UV map, and we can now select our texture from here, and you can see now what it's done. Basically I've got all these four swatches of color, and all these elements that correspond to the elements on the drone. I've moved to the swatch with the color that I want this to be in. So basically what we can do, we can, when it's all a mess, say these are totally different somewhere else, you can see that it's changed because I've moved the elements around. And when we're at this stage, what we can do, we can go to edit mode. We can go to UV image. Just gonna undo it. So basically what we can do when we first unwrap it and we want to assign a color to any element that we want, what I'm doing is I'm enabling keep UV and edit mode mesh selection in sync, which basically lets me select, say, faces, and select an individual face, or hover over an element and press L, select the whole island. I'm going to select this, and with this enabled, it selects the same faces on my model. So basically it lets me see which element I have chosen. So also I can do the same here, select any polygon that I want, or any face, and press Ctrl+ on the numpad to expand the selection. So now I know that I'm editing this element. So now if I go back to my UV image, I know that this is the element that I want to move around, and this is the element I want to change the color of. So now with this selected, I can just move it around, and if I move it, if I were to move it here, for example, I effectively change the color of this top here. So great. So that's what we need to do for all the elements that we want to change the color of. By the way, none of these elements can overlap each other. That's important for the next step. So this is what we do for everything that we want to change the color of. So say if I selected these, which are, just select these, which are these kind of armor pads on the model, on this model, and right now they're orange, and I want to change them to teal. I would just move it around here. Only obviously I would make sure that none of these overlap, but just for the sake of presenting this, I've moved it to the teal square, and there we go, now they're teal. So this is how I change the colors of all the elements of my models for this game, at least. Let's just undo it. So we've got all our elements moved to the color swatch that we want them to be in. So the next step is I'm creating a new image, and I'm going to call it, let's say this is a drone, so I'm going to call it drone baked, because we're going to be baking the lighting into this map now. So I've got my new image, and then I need to go to the drone material. I'm just going to copy the image texture node by clicking it and pressing Shift D. I'm going to hook up my UV coordinates to the vector of this image. I don't need to hook it up anywhere else, but I'm just going to select the texture that we've just created, drone baked, and I don't need to connect it anywhere. I need to have it selected as our active texture for the baking to happen. Next thing, let's just go to the main window, and I'm going to press Shift C to see what it looks like when it's rendered. So we haven't got any lights in the scene, so the first thing I do is I'm just gonna come here into World Properties and press Use Nodes, and I'm gonna come to the Materials tab, Materials window, press this world icon, and this is the material I'm using for the world. So basically what I want for the world is a texture. I'm using a small HDR texture, which gives me a bit of lighting when I'm working on those things, just to make me see stuff in some lighting. This is a fast way to add some lighting to the scene. So let me show you that. I'm just going to create environment texture node connected to the color. I'm going to open a texture, and I've got this small Studio 008 small HDR. I'm going to include it for download in the description, I guess. Now if we go we've got that hooked up, and if we go to render by pressing Shift C, this is what it does. We've got our environment texture in place, and this gives us some quick lighting in the scene. So we've got this ambient occlusion going on the drone. We can enable this ambient occlusion, although I'm just going to take it down, way down, I guess. So I want the ambient lighting to be a bit bluish color to reflect kind of atmospheric skylight. What I can do, this is completely optional, but I'm just going to go into here, into the world material. I'm just going to press Shift A and add a color ramp. Change the black to a bit of a bluish tint color. And what it does, if we go back to our screen here, it's changed all these grays, all the gray in that map into blue, like this light blue. Doesn't seem to have made much of a difference, but there we go. We've got our ambient occlusion going on, some lighting and ambient occlusion going on the drone. So what we're going to do next is we're going to bake that info into this texture map that we've done. Let's go back to the object materials. We've got that texture selected in our drone material. And now we go to the render tab and go to bake. Make sure we have combined selected. We don't need to, in this case, export glossy or subsurface because this shader is not using any of this. It's just a flat, rough shader. I don't believe we need transmission either. And what we can do is, I'm just making sure that resolution is set to 100%, sampling is set to something high. You can either increase these samples here, or you can take square samples. It's just gonna raise the total sample number to the square of this. I'm just guessing if you raise this to 100, say this is gonna make it 10,000. So I'm just gonna take square samples. Geometry, light paths. Let me just enable full global illumination for this. And also for performance, I have GPU compute enabled. So I'm just gonna increase the sample size, the bracket size of this. And I'm gonna hit bake. And it's gonna start baking the map into this texture drone that we've selected here, drone baked. It may take long. I could have unticked this and raised the samples to say something like 300, which would be still less, a lot less than this amount of samples, and it would still look good for our purposes. But let's make it really nice one this time. So let's pause it for a moment. So we've got our texture baked, and this is what it looks like. But it basically took this texture, rendered the image with all the light being calculated, and baked it onto this. So we've got these shadows going on and some color spill from other surfaces. And the reason I'm doing this is just to get some simple lighting going on in the texture, because when we import the model into our game engine, say Unreal Engine 4, this is what it's going to look like as we see it in the viewport. It's not going to be rendered like this with lighting being calculated. It's going to look like this. So with our texture baked now, we can hook it up to our drone material, and this is what the drone looks like now in the viewport, with all this lighting baked into the texture. So this is what it looks like without the lighting baked, and this is what it looks like with the lighting baked. So basically this gives us something going on in the texture rather than it being plain colors. And what we can do now is we can go into texture paint mode, and we can paint directly on the model, or we can select paint mode in here in our UV image window, and we can paint over here. And that also shows up on the drone. So I'm just gonna undo it. And what I'm doing for my game at the moment is basically I'm just gonna press S once, not click, just press S on your keyboard. It's gonna sample the color over wherever you've hovered with your mouse cursor. I'm just gonna make it a bit brighter, probably change it to color overlay to add, take the strength down a little bit. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to paint over it. You can press F and change the size of the brush. And I'm going to paint lightly. So you can see we've added a bit of a highlight going on to this. So I'm going to do the same here. Press S to sample this color. And since we've got it set to add, it's just going to add the brightness to it. And it's painting on it depends on the angle you're viewing your model. So let's just undo it. And let's try the angle. Oh, that's the angle we want. We can also, instead of trying to get a correct angle going on, we can enable face masking, and basically what it's going to do is, before we paint, if we go into edit mode and select the faces that we want to paint on, and then go back to texture paint mode, or you can switch between these here. Now you can see with this selected, it shows us that we can only paint on these faces, and it's not going to go over anywhere else. So this is certainly something that we can use. Right, so what we have now is something like this. We can go into edit mode, we can select some of the faces on the top, and if we want to select all the faces on the same plane, we can press Ctrl, Shift, Alt, F. It's a bit of a long shortcut, but it's very useful. And we can play with the sharpness of an angle. See, I brought it down a little bit, and it selected all the faces on this plane. So with this selected, I'm going back to texture paint mode, and with this selected as well, we can only paint on this surface. So let's just do some lighting on here. Just press F to make it a bit smaller. So it's just adding a little bit of details like this. That doesn't necessarily look good, but there we go. So I'm going to sample this color by pressing S on the keyboard again, and just make a little bit of a highlight here. Do the same here. I'm going to sample this color and do a little bit of a highlight here. We can do it for anything that we want. Basically, it adds some color variation to the texture, some cartoony looking colors. Now we can go back to our texture, and you can see all these details that we've painted on appeared here on this texture. So we need to remember, if we want to keep those changes, we need to save the image. So save it as drone baked. Now in Unreal Engine, we can import the drone. Again, link to download the drone model is going to be in the description. We can import our drone into Unreal Engine. It's not a skeletal mesh, and we don't want to import the materials with it. So we've got our drone in the Unreal Engine. If we open it, it's obviously untextured. It hasn't got a material assigned to it. So we're going to have to create a new material for it. So let's right click and select material. Let's call it drone underscore matte. But before we edit the material, let's import the texture that we've made in Blender. There we go, save it all. Now we can open the drone material, and what I'm doing, for this game at least, I want this to be rough and not have these specular highlights. So what I'm doing is I'm pressing 1 on the keyboard and clicking anywhere in the editor for this constant parameter with one value in it. I connect it to roughness. And as you can see, value of 0 in this one makes it actually like really glossy. So what I want to do is set it to 1, which will make it completely rough. It doesn't have any specular highlights or glossiness to it. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hold T on my keyboard and press anywhere, and that's going to create a texture sample for me. I'm going to hook it up to base color. Now what we want to do we want to assign the texture that we've just imported. And there we go, that's our material. We can preview it on the plane. This is what it looks like. So we can go ahead and save it. And if we go back to our drone, and for the material, select the material we've just made, which was drone_matte. There we go. This is what our drone looks like in Unreal Engine now.